Morning, my name's Anna and I'm Head of Knowledge at Future of London. We're really delighted that you can join us for today's webinar, Social Value, A Decade of Progress. This event is the very first event in our major programme for 23-24, and that programme is called Unlocking Social Value. This programme is a 12-month exploration into how housing and regeneration can unlock more social value for communities across London and beyond. We're going to be bringing together practitioners, investors, community stakeholders, and through this programme we hope to develop the case for more meaningful social value interventions. We're going to be providing examples of social value in the built environment, explaining how it can be done well. And through this programme, we'll be also asking some of the trickier questions relating to social value, like in the 10 years that we've had it as a formal idea, is social value really delivering for the people who need it most? This programme is all made possible thanks to our sponsors, so that's WIG, Link City, Countryside Partnerships, Montague Evans, Mount Anvil, Paula Thomas Edwards, Trowers and Hamlins and New Capital. So huge thanks to all of those organisations who are making this work possible. Before we get into the meat of the session, I just want to run through some housekeeping stuff. So do get involved in the chat function. You should be able to see that on the right hand side of your screen. Please say hello, let us know your organisation and if there's any particular interests that you have in the topic. And then throughout the session, we'll be hearing from some great panellists, and I'm sure you'll be interested to ask lots of questions. You can do that in two ways. You can either use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of the screen, in the middle, or you can pop your questions into the chat and one of my colleagues will be moderating that and seeing if there's anything that we should be asking our panel. Also in the chat right now, you will have seen that we've put our hashtag for the project, Unlocking Social Value, and our socials in there as well. So please do make comments if you feel like we're saying something interesting. We'd really appreciate that. So before we get into the panels today, we thought it'd be a really good idea at the very beginning of this project to take a quick temperature check to understand what the sector's thinking about social value, and to understand what you understand of social value right now. So on your screen you should see a quick poll. There's 3 questions there, and we would really appreciate your responses just to give us a sense of what the sector's thinking right now. We'll review all of those responses at the end of the session and see if our panelists have got any comments on that. Great, I can see everyone's completing it live, so brilliant, thank you very much. I'll just give you a few moments to get involved in that. And then on to today's session, Social Value, A Decade of Progress. Social value is defined as the benefit to the economy, communities and the environment from commercial investment. And with rising poverty, inequality, creating meaningful social value is more important than ever. The built environment sector, of course, has got a really important role to play in this, and it's got huge potential to deliver meaningful social value. And since the Public Services Act of 2012, public bodies have been required by law to consider the social value of urban development projects. Today, we're going to be looking back at the past 10 years and asking, how has social value been delivered historically? What's going to be happening in the future? And is social value having the impact that it's intended? To answer these questions, we've got 2 brilliant panels with us today, and our first panel will be tackling that first question, the question of how social value is being delivered. We've invited 4 speakers, each representing different sides of the sector, to share what social value means to them and how they're delivering it through their work with communities. We're delighted to be joined by Layla Conway, Head of Education, Careers and Youth Engagement at London Legacy Development, Paul Quinn, Director of Regen at Clarion Housing Group, Louise Page-Jennings, Director of Communications and Social Impact at New Capital, and Polly Robbins, Co-working Space and Events Manager at Outlandish. All of their brilliant bios are in the agendas that were sent round, so I do encourage you to have a read of that, but I won't go into details now. Instead, I will simply introduce our first panellist, Louise, and ask her to share with us her perspective on what social value is and how she's delivering it through her work at the moment. Over to you, Louise.
Thanks, Anna. Fantastic. So U Capital is a real estate investor and developer, and we're just going to present a couple of slides today on two of our projects. These projects are not necessarily ways that we're sort of saying how it necessarily should be done. They're just ways that we're doing it. So we acknowledge that there's a lot to learn as well. If we could go on to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. So one of the questions that we were asked was what social value means to us. I think where from a U Capital perspective, one of the things that we really focus on is making sure that it is adaptable, so that it's tailored to the exact location and exact project that we're working on, and also that it's end-to-end, that we're building it into our appraisals from day one, and that we're delivering it all the way through by working with our tenants as end users as well. The two projects that I'm going to talk to you about are Olympia. So Olympia we started in 2017. It is a really big project, hopefully, that a couple of you will know about. We're keeping the existing exhibition halls, we're adding 500,000 square feet of office space, 2 new hotels, a 1,500 seat theatre, a 4,000 capacity performing arts venue, over 2 acres of public realm, and lots in between. And then if we could go on to our next slide as well, I'll talk you through the other project today. So this is another project that we acquired in 2020. It is completely different to Olympia. So it's Shepherd's Bush Market. It's an iconic London market that, again, hopefully some of you will know. Our big challenge there is to invest in the market and reinvigorate it and give it the boost it really needs at the moment, while avoiding gentrification, while really looking after the existing market traders, and also delivering an ambitious development on land adjacent to it. So what we're proposing to do there is exactly as I've just said. So invest in the market and give it a much needed boost, and then develop on the land next door. So it will be a commercial building with a life sciences incubator hub in the bottom on the ground floor, and 40 affordable homes for Hammersmith and Fulham Council. So no private housing on the site. If we can jump on to the next slide, that would be great. So one of the things I really wanted to highlight is how close these two sites are together, and how completely different the approach that we've taken is. I think there are many different reasons for why we've taken different approaches. I think social value in 2017, when we bought Olympia, was different to what it is today. We've learned an awful lot in the last 5 or 6 years, and we've applied a lot of that to what we're doing in Shepherd's Bush Market. Even the people that live, the people around the sites, the people that use the sites are really different. And again, we've had to make sure that what we're doing is completely tailored to both of those sites. The main ways I think that we've done this is by starting incredibly early with the local community. And for me, I think community engagement and social value are intertwined and impossible to pull apart. I think you can't build in social value until you know what the community wants or really needs. So so those are the two sort of things that we would focus on. If we can move to the next slide, that would be great. So this is a little bit more information on Olympia and how we've done social value there. So as I said, we bought it in 2017, and we really focused on the consultation with the local community, and also with the exhibition organisers and people that use the business. Historically, it had been seen as kind of the younger sibling of Earl's Court. It had always had piecemeal investment, but never anything wholesale. And so one of the things that we first did was really talk to the community about how we open it up, how we make it a place that they can use, and how we can actually make it less of a fortress and more of a sort of somewhere that people go to. We really then embedded that end to end, and I think that's really important. And one of the things that I've definitely learned is that no singular part of the development process can deliver social value on its own. In this case, what we've done is also create some, as well as looking at the architecture, as well as opening the building up, we've created some public-private partnerships through our tenants. So the Brit School and Alpha Plus Group are coming to bring a performing arts school. And we're now working with all of our tenants to really ensure that the social value that we've ingrained the whole way through the process is coming out through the main completed development as well. If we could go on to the next slide, that's great. Shepherd's Bush market. So again, just talking about the market, I think this has really tested us over the last 2.5 years in terms of what we thought social value was and what it really is. So we've spent the last 2.5 years really working with the market traders and understanding what they want and what they need. Shepherd's Bush market has been was sold in 2011 by TfL, and since then has had different consecutive owners coming along and bringing forward plans. The plans historically haven't been supported by the traders, but we're now pleased to be in a position where over 90% of them have agreed heads of terms with us, which basically means they are agreed with the financial packages of support that we're putting together to help them through the development, to make sure that they can stay and trade and to make sure that the market isn't gentrified. That being said, again, as with everything, it is not easy and there is no perfect solution. So I'm definitely not presenting today saying, ta-da, we've done it. But it's something that we've had to think very long and hard about, and we've had to work with the traders on. The architecture has changed massively as a result of kind of feedback from the public. The way that I've done consultation has changed throughout the last 2.5 years based on this feedback. And the way that we manage and operate the market has also changed. The types of traders we want to bring in, the way that we're treating the whole market has been really difficult to navigate, but hopefully we're coming to a good place now. I think with the main development as well, one of the other challenges that we've really found, again, in terms of delivering social value is, especially in a market, I think it's a bit of a microcosm. What does this market mean to local people? And it means different things to different people, and everybody has their own opinion on it. So again, I think that's one of the things when delivering social value, we've really kind of had to think about, you know, who needs our support in the market, what the local community needs from the market, and then balancing all of the kind of more conventional ideas that people have around development and concerns that they have. I'm very conscious of time, so if we can nip to the next slide, I think that really, yeah, that was it for me. So hopefully, if you head down to Shepherd's Bush Market and if you look at our proposals, they should be submitted very soon. You can see that hopefully it's still reflective of the community that's there today.
Thanks, Louise. And I was lucky enough actually to join Louise on a field trip to Shepherd's Bush Market a couple of years ago. And what Louise mentioned there about a variety of characters really became very evident to me on my visit. There's some real standout characters on that market, and it sounds like you're treading a very delicate line in terms of managing all of those different needs and desires. And thank you, Louise, for your honesty in recognizing that, as you've said, I think there's a lot to learn still, and that the Shepherd's Bush Market has indeed really tested you and your understanding of what social value is. So I'm sure we can get into what some of those tests have been in the conversation and Q&A in a moment. Thanks, Louise. We're going to be handing over now to Paul Quinn from Clarion Housing. So without further ado, Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Anna. Good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Quinn. I'm the Director of Regeneration at Clarion Housing. We're a large housing association. I've got just 5 slides and 7 minutes, so I'm going to jump into the meat of this. So could we have the first slide? So social value is increasingly a really big deal at Clarion, and it's not just because it sits well with our social mission. It's becoming a core element in many aspects of our day-to-day services. And increasingly, it's becoming embedded in the group's overall financial strategy, which we'll have a look at in a moment or two. But it's not always been like this. Social value in previous years has largely been limited to Clarion Futures, which is our charitable arm, and sporadically applied in other parts of the business, including regeneration and increasingly our development activity. But in the past year, there's been a significant change, I think. There's much more greater emphasis across the group on social value outcomes. And that's maybe best seen in our procurement activities. Our monthly cross-departmental social value review is chaired by our Director of Procurement, which I think is quite significant. And Clarion Futures, our charitable arm, is our primary vehicle for the delivery and monitoring of social value. And again, we'll have a look at that in a moment or two. So together with the procurement team, it was Clarion Futures who led the development of our social value strategy. And these are the headlines just from that strategy there. And that starts now to underpin all our procurement activity. And when you think that our turnover in a normal year is around about £1 billion, that's a lot of procurement activity. So huge potential here to generate social value outcomes. Next slide. So this is what the last full financial year looked like for us. Now, I would say we're further on again, even than where we sit here. But Clarion Futures itself delivers a huge amount of direct social value, and we top slice our surplus every year to support Clarion Futures. We're very proud of it. It's a very important organization for us, and really sets the tone for our approach. We in total then delivered around about 131 million in social value, and we base that number on our HACT calculation. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with HACT. So that's the sort of mechanism that underpins all of this. So we are able to sort of understand exactly what our input is. And I think this last one's quite important. Obviously we're a big organization. We raise money on the market to support our activities. In the last year, we raised £300 million on ESG linked loans. So that's environment, social and governance. So we're actually raising money from investors who want to see ESG outcomes as part of their investment. Now that's 300 million raised there. In total, we've raised over £1 billion in ESG linked loans. So this really starts to see social value placed at the heart of the whole group's business plan. And that's very much about forcing us in some ways, pushing us to deliver against our social value KPIs, because it's core to our financial modelling. Next slide. And if it's worth doing, it's worth measuring. So again, this is our core activity that we review every month. Again, it's our colleagues in Clarion Futures who keep us honest. And so we review regularly how we're performing against our targets, whether we're going to achieve those KPIs, which contracts are delivering against social value for us, so we can start to see some gaps. Which are the departments or divisions that are able to make the greatest contribution, or where we think we need to push them a little bit harder. So this is a very much an ongoing process, absolutely central to the way we deliver our social value. We really wouldn't be able to do it unless we take this level of monitoring and checking our delivery as we go along. Next slide. And this isn't going to be the most exciting slide you're going to see this morning, I'm sure, but this is the nuts and bolts of what social value looks like on the ground very often. This is just an example of the sort of thing that we would include in our procurement of, say, in this case, it's a contractor. We'll have slightly different expectations for different types of services. But right from the outset, based on the contract value and the length of contract, we will be setting targets that we would want to see delivered in each individual contract. So in this case, this is an example from a phase of a regeneration project that I'm running. And so we'll spell out what we want to see. The empty column is where the contractor will fill in what they think they're going to deliver. This becomes part of the formal procurement strategy and the scoring of that procurement. So it's really embedded from the outset, and so we know what we can expect. And then we will press, obviously, as we go along to make sure that not only do we deliver those outputs, but where we can expand on them. These schemes generate much more than you just see on this list here, but this just makes sure that our core KPIs are covered right from the start and that everyone's on the same page, whether it's our colleagues in Clarion, or it's a construction company that we're working with, or a local voluntary sector that we're supporting. This is all in the public domain. Then the next slide. And this is the last slide. I thought it'd just be useful to see how this plays out in practice. So this is just an example of one of our regeneration projects. This is the Sutton dwellings in Chelsea, Kensington and Chelsea. It's a major regeneration project, whereas as all regen projects, very complicated, existing population kept intact and in situ. So people are living in all this scaffolding, incredibly, and very gingerly moving around this site. But part of what we have to do here is to bring the residents along with this and make sure that they understand the full benefits that we can squeeze out of a project like this. So as well as all this physical work going on, and in this case, the contractor is Durkin, where we get employment and training and have a number of targets that we set them and that the local authority set us to deliver in this scheme. We also run street parties. We have a Coronation Street party coming up on Sunday. We do open air cinema. That's my team and some colleagues from Crown Futures getting very wet, doing some volunteering. So the scheme as a whole has to deliver across multiple aspects of social value. The whole idea is we squeeze every last possible social and economic benefit out of our investment here. And just if you are interested in this scheme, it is an incredibly interesting scheme. If you have a look at suttonchelsealive.com, have a look at that site and you'll see how this site is being built out in real time. So the last thing just to say for me is this for us is not a nice to have. This is core business. We're getting better at it, but we still have a long way to go. And I hope that we'll be able to work with some of our colleagues on this call over the next few years as we push social value that little bit harder. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Really brilliant to hear that social value is a really core part of the business, and perhaps something we can pick up on the Q&A is about organisational change and how that has happened for Clarion, and if you think that might be necessary for other organisations. I'm also very curious to know if the coronation quiche will be served at your party this Sunday. But maybe we can chat about that later. Thanks, Paul. All right. Well, next up we have Polly. So, Polly, if I can ask you to take to the stage and share with us your views on social value. Thanks.
Yeah, hi everybody, good morning, and thanks for inviting me today. My name's Polly Robbins and I'm a member of Outlandish. We are a workers' cooperative, and the main part of our business is actually building websites for social purpose. So we work with a lot of trade unions, third sector organisations, activists and academics to try and create tech for a better world. And 5 years ago or so, we won a contract off the back of a pilot that we were running. We won a 10-year contract with Islington Council to operate an affordable workspace. We were their first affordable workspace in a programme which is going to be running for more than 15 years and then some. So in exchange for 10 years free rent, we have to generate social value. And each month we report back to the council using the social value portal. So that's the national TOMS. And we do this in a number of ways. So sorry, slide please. Sorry, next slide. Thanks. So yeah, we're a co-working space, but I think we're probably not your average co-working space. So in terms of the co-working space, at the moment we have about 100 members. We've got 30 desks plus a classroom. So there's never 100 people, or rarely, very rarely, 100 people there on any one day. But we've got 100 people from predominantly tech for good sector. We have a particular emphasis on sort of tech for good careers, industries, and also alternative business models. So I mentioned that we're a workers' cooperative. We support a whole bunch of other co-ops, social enterprises, people who are interested in trying to create a technology sector which isn't so reliant or isn't so kind of focused on venture capital. We have a really big focus on community. So that means that everybody who's part of our workspace, they pay an affordable rate, and we expect them in exchange to share their skills, share their resources. We try to ask everybody if they, for example, need a web designer or a photographer, or they've got an opportunity or a job, to make sure that that's posted first and foremost to the community to try and kind of strengthen the community. And we've had tens of thousands of pounds of like actual contract work exchanged amongst users of the space. So not only do people kind of join a community and get a cheap kind of desk and workspace, but they're also likely to be growing their business from the connections that they make within the space, which is pretty great. We have a pay what you can membership. So we have recommended prices on our website, but we wanted to make sure that we can be completely inclusive of everybody in our local community. We're based in Finsbury Park, which you may well know it. It's actually one of London's most deprived wards. Islington is, I think, one of the most unequal boroughs in the country. So even though it's got great pockets of great wealth, it's also got pockets of great poverty as well. And Finsbury Park is one of those. So we want to make sure that people from the local estates and, you know, local more like marginalized communities are able to access the workspace in a way that they might not be able to afford traditional kind of commercial workspace prices. Next slide, please. So we also run a lot of training. So one way that we do this is by making sure that our community shares skills. So everybody is asked to kind of run workshops, depending on what skills they have. So often it's kind of tech skills. We also run a masterclass program, and that is geared towards some of the outcomes that Islington's looking for as our kind of key partner. So, for example, career advice, helping people to get onto the career ladder or to take that next step. We run things around kind of like entry-level coding. So our masterclass program is just 3 sessions, and we have kind of 12 a year. So 12 times 3, 36 sessions a year. They're completely free to access. We have around 20 people come to each one of those in the evenings. And they're fairly light touch, but the idea is that people then get a kind of foot into learning more about our more in-depth training. So we have an anchor tenant called Founders and Coders, and they're one of London's only free bootcamp programs. So they teach people for between 12 and 16 weeks full time, and take them on an apprenticeship scheme. In order to learn how they do 2 programs. One is around JavaScript, so that's just kind of traditional web and software development, and the other one, which is newer, is around machine learning. So we constantly have like groups of mostly young people, with a particular emphasis on getting people in who are more marginalized from tech careers into tech. Next slide, please. The last way we generate social value is through events and events program. This means that we have like a whole evening program of events which focus on tech, the new economy, the climate, anything which is kind of like related to more like the political beliefs that we have. This means that we've got like a whole community of people who come in the evenings and sometimes at lunchtimes. So people who might not traditionally need a workspace, but who are interested in learning more about these kinds of subjects. Next slide, please. So we generate around £800,000 of social value each year through these activities, and we report that back to Islington every month. It's really amazing to be working with Islington in this like really productive and kind of open, transparent partnership. I think we're really lucky to kind of have that. It's quite unique. We mostly work with the inclusive economy team. So that's a team which cuts across all of the departments within Islington. So we have like really great introductions to the employment team, youth team, built environment, and of course, affordable workspace. And that means that we can get communications out like across council channels, which of course helps to like bring in those diverse people who can really benefit from our training and our offer. We were the first social value project that Islington kind of invested in, and so we've actually kind of worked together to get our head around some of the reporting requirements. I would say that some of the reporting requirements are a bit kind of one size fits all, and we've been trying to kind of work with Islington and then their subsequent affordable workspaces to kind of help people understand how they map onto a kind of human real situation within kind of co-working and workspace provision. And in addition, we've been working with Islington, and I could do a whole other presentation about this on additional projects. So we're working with Islington quite closely to understand how they can adapt their supply chain to make it more local, more ethical and more cooperative. So investing in smaller co-ops where they can actually procure goods and services. So not only tech, but all sorts of things, including, like, for example, adult social care, and how they can actually start buying locally rather than having to kind of fund small businesses actually, or small social enterprises and charities actually trying to work with them on a commercial basis. So yeah, I think I'm out of time. That's it. I think I've got my socials on the next slide. And yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Brilliant, thanks, Polly. It really seems like there's some interesting bottom-up work going on, so a shift away perhaps from top-down approaches to social value. And again, maybe that's something that the audience would like to pick up on in our conversation that we'll be having shortly. So thank you very much for that. Last but by no means least, we have Layla Conway from LLDC. So Layla, if you'd like to turn your video on and share with us your thoughts on social value, that would be brilliant.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for having me here today. So my name's Layla Conway. I'm Head of Education, Careers and Youth Engagement at the London Legacy Development Corporation. And for those of you who don't know what we do, we're a mayoral development corporation responsible for the planning, development and management of the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. Yeah, next slide, please. Oh, sorry, next slide. So yeah, so we're in situ because of the Olympic Games and what happened back in 2012, and really we won the bid on promising a lasting legacy for the people and the communities that frame the park. So our mission, we're really like a mission-led organisation, and that really underpins what we do. And we've always had a kind of set of priority themes around how we deliver social, economic and environmental benefits for the communities, and that essentially guided us to be able to use this once in a lifetime opportunity to really create this new piece of city, and for those priorities to be realised by the communities who live there. Next slide, please. So yeah, just wanted to kind of touch on our approach and how we've gone about doing things over the last 10 years. I think, one of the key things that we started with was really about changing the narrative of East London, rather than it looking at kind of coming in and helping the poor communities of East London. It's really about acknowledging that this area of London has been underserved for a long time, and instead looking at the community's untapped talent, potential and diversity, and designing innovative approaches has always been a really core part of what we do. Really being able to work with communities and local groups to really understand the challenges that they're facing, and to work with them to kind of try and test innovative solutions, and also provide the conditions to be flexible and to be able to respond to change. And ensuring collective leadership has also been really important, and making sure that what we do is as meaningful, as and impactful as possible, working with borough stakeholders, local residents and local community organisations, building that trust and working towards collective goals has really been important. And responding to demand also, and that could be sector demands, knowing that there's particular talent needed in terms of like pipelines into various sectors, or whether that be a demand in a local community for resources or spaces. That's been really important, that we're able to listen and respond, to have that long-term impact rather than just in the short term. And involving the future generations, which is close to my heart and really important. Essentially it is the future generation that's going to benefit from the transformation taking place, and so it's important that they're involved in shaping the place that they would like to see in the future, but also that they're able to benefit from all the careers and opportunities that are coming as a result. And then obviously what underpins all of that is establishing these kind of tools and measures for success. And obviously some of what we're doing now, the benefits aren't going to be felt for many years to come, and so it's ensuring that we're measuring as we go, learning on the journey, but also having longitudinal studies in place to be able to kind of measure that success over time. Yeah, next slide. So just some examples of some of the things that we've been doing on the park. And so, delivering economic benefits to local people has been, a core part of what we've, put into a lot of the contracts and procurement contracts in the park. You know, it's always been about developing local talent and helping people to thrive, particularly within the key sectors on the park, which is around the construction, the built environment, digital and creative. And we've always weaved social value through things like apprenticeships, paid internships, paid work experience placements, really paving the way for underrepresented groups to be able to thrive in these sectors. And also working with schools has been a big part of what we do. We've delivered a programme called Design, Engineer, Construct in partnership with Class of Your Own, really identifying where some of the skills gaps are within the construction and built environment industry, and starting to kind of get industry into schools and shaping curriculum, and being able to kind of create that sustainable pipeline into those careers. Then we've been doing a lot around shaping the physical environment, using interim uses as a way to start to kind of generate activity and to you know, test new ways of working. One example has been Hub 67, which was a community, a temporary community space that we put in situ, and working with the community who identified there was a real lack of community space. And not only was that, you know, really instrumental at that moment in time to kind of draw people to the area and start to test ideas, it was a way of us seeing how things worked before we built our own, you know, community facilities on the park, and you know, bringing communities on that journey with us. Inspiring the next generation is really important. We've got our Elevate programme, which is all about, you know, by young people for young people, really, you know, helping us to co-design and shape this place, and, you know, being the kind of the voice out to the community as well. And they've really been involved at all levels of development, and we've even got a board, and one of our young people sits on our main board as well. But we also have really developed programs over the time. So we've got a careers program, we've also got our really successful summer school, and that really gives an opportunity for developers or everyone involved on the park to come together to really give back and to, you know, start to, you know, provide those once in a lifetime experiences to local young people. And community program has always been really important as well in what we do, so enabling the space for things to be tested on the park, but also then thinking about how some of those things that happen on the park can move into permanent spaces as well. So yeah, next slide. So yeah, as we move forward, we're kind of moving towards looking at how we generate social value through like a kind of an inclusive economy lens. So that expands across health, well-being, the environment, connectedness, you know, participation, belonging, fairness. You know, and it's important that we are looking at, you know, social goals that are able to track success through, you know, a set of prosperity measures, and we're working with the Institute of Global Prosperity on that. And we now have, you know, physical community assets on the park that are centred around, you know, community ownership, where community groups are operating and providing the conditions for, you know, community connectedness and community participation, you know, all key ingredients delivering a successful place. So, you know, to support this work, we're in the process of establishing a community anchors kind of network, which will kind of establish the conditions for community organisation now anchored on the park to lead collectively on social value. In order to, you know, adopt this approach, we need to begin to pivot the way we invest and resource this activity, so it becomes more of a collective endeavour, you know, one with deep roots in this place, so that when, you know, the show leaves town, which it does in every regeneration project and development, that there are, you know, the conditions for the communities that are there to thrive forevermore. And that's it, I think, my slides. Thank you.
Thanks, Layla, really brilliant. And I think you've kind of highlighted a point that I've heard lots of times in the last couple of months when I've been speaking to people about social value, which is the legacy of social value. So I think your phrase, when the show leaves the road, was that what you said? Or takes the road? I think that's a really great way of talking about it. So thank you very much. And I was really interested to hear that the guiding principle for the social benefit of people, that golden thread, how that's travelled through the last 10 years and will be playing out in your future programming as well. So thanks very much for that. I'd like to invite panel 1 to turn their videos back on. We're now into the Q&A. I've got lots of questions, but it turns out so does everyone who's joined the webinar. So what I'm going to do is put my questions aside and instead ask the ones that have come from our audience. The first one is for everyone, so just let me know if you fancy responding to this one. It's from Mark Bagnet, so apologies if I got your surname wrong there. In your experience, is the social value agenda being driven by the public sector, with the private sector playing catch up, or is it the other way round? Paul, you're smiling, so I'm going to come to you first.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Anna. Yeah, I'll be honest. I think it is largely driven by the public sector. Now, not to say there aren't private sector players who are doing a really good job, but it's very often in response to a requirement that's laid out by the public sector, or in our case, the charitable sector, the large housing associations and similar sort of quasi-public bodies. So definitely, I would say the main drivers coming from there, which is not to denigrate the work the private sector is doing. Lots of the best thinking's coming out of the private sector. And of course, they're looking for a competitive edge all the time. Absolutely fair, no problem with that. And it's contributing to our overall objectives. But I do think the onus is on ourselves in the public and charitable voluntary sector to make it business as usual. You know, these aren't add-ons, these just need to be part and parcel of, in our case, we drive it through our financial strategy for the group and our procurement strategy. And then it just becomes automatic. You know, if a major project is procured now in our place without social value attached to it, then there are questions asked, and that's how it should be.
Thanks, Paul. So your view is that lots of the best thinking can and does come from the private sector, but the onus is on the public and the charitable to be making it core, the centre of the business.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Louise, as a private sector representative, how would you respond to that?
I would probably, in most part, agree that historically the public and charitable sector have definitely championed the cause. I would say now, as the private sector, we actually have a lot of onus from us on our investors who also want us to be really conscious of ESG, obviously, and making sure we're building that into all of our projects. And the competitive edge point is absolutely correct as well. Yeah, there is a lot of good competition now, I think, in this industry for people to be delivering social value. I think the challenge is just making sure that it's genuine and real and doesn't become marketing speak.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, the genuine and realness of it. So wherever it's being driven from, whether that's a desire to have a competitive edge or whatever that might be, as long as what's delivered is genuine and real, that's really critical. And given Future of London's position as an organisation that connects public and private sectors, hopefully through the rest of this programme we can continue this conversation about the role of the public and the private sector working together, working differently, and how each of those players can deliver that really meaningful social value that's important. Layla and Polly, have you got anything that you'd like to contribute to that particular discussion, or shall I jump in with another question? We do have lots of them.
No, I think everything was covered. But yeah, the public sector, I think, has definitely been driving it. But I think there's a real opportunity now, for the private sector to step into that space, because, you know, they don't have the same level of risk attached to what they do, and they can approach things in a little bit of a different way. And I think, to the last point around how we can work better together, I think is quite key. Yeah.
Brilliant. All right, well, let's jump on to the next question then. This is a question from Tessa for Louise, but I think it's actually relevant to the whole of the group, or could be answered by the whole of the group. So Louise, you mentioned that Shepherd's Bush had been tricky in some respects, and that you've changed the way you consult regarding social value. So how has that consultation approach changed? And I suppose for the others, in your experience, have you had to adapt and develop your consultation, community engagement, co-production approaches in order to reflect social value?
Absolutely. I think I was actually trying to type the answer but I was getting distracted by listening to other people, which is what I should have been doing. But yeah, I think it changed a lot. We did we did lots of consultation that went out to people, but we did events at the market, and it's actually small things that, again, you know, reflect my own bias and my own opinions, but the way we presented the graphics, people had feedback on that. People had feedback on asking people to sign in. For some people, seen as a barrier to entry for events. It was actually quite small things that I think made us think the most, and changed the way that we did things. And as with any project, balancing a lot of loud voices and different opinions and needs in the community has been difficult to navigate, and making sure that we're really not that we would have done this, but I think it's often, and you see it in development a lot, it's very easy to listen to the people who reinforce your views, and it's actually good to go out there and actually think, what does the community want and need, and really dig into that. So it made us go a lot deeper, but also change, maybe subtly, maybe not so subtly, some of the ways that we actually ran events.
Thanks. Anyone else want to respond with a comment on how their approach to consultation or community engagement, and I'm using those terms interchangeably with acknowledgement that they're not the same thing. Want to jump in with a response there? Yeah, go on, Paul.
Just very quickly, I think very good points made there. I think that we have found over the last few years, we do a lot of consultations. You might imagine we're doing a lot of schemes all the time, and I've seen it, I don't know how many statements of community involvement linked to planning applications and stuff, and they're very much a sort of tick box exercise. I think we have increasingly tried to use our consultation events to open people's awareness up to everything that's possible. So it's to try and encourage people not just to think about the physical, if it's a planning application, so just thinking about heights of buildings and density, but how it's going to impact the neighbourhood as a whole, and quality of life. And part of that is employment and training and green space and support for voluntary sector. And so, increasingly we have our colleagues who work specifically in social value come along to consultation events, talk to people specifically to try and get people and residents and other stakeholders sort of open their minds really to the whole breadth of possibility. And social value is a very important part in opening that conversation up for us.
Oh, Anna, you're on mute.
I'm on mute. That was a rookie error. I was just saying that I've got a final brilliant question that I want to ask, but in the interests of time, I'm going to keep it back for when we have our big panel discussion right at the end. But to give you a heads up so you can have a think about your responses, panel one, it's what are your thoughts on social value becoming a procurement-driven process? Is this the right way to embed social value within projects and programmes? So have a think about that, and we'll come back to that one at the end. Thank you very much, panel one. Your responses have been brilliant. It's been really insightful to understand how social value is being thought about and being delivered across various different aspects of the sector. We could have, of course, gone on for a lot longer with that discussion, but time is of the essence, and so I would like now to move on to considering less about how social value is being delivered, but more about if it's being delivered meaningfully and for whom. So with that question in mind, I'll invite our second panel to join us. We have Michael Blake, Head of Social Investment at the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, Marcus Bate, Blake and Bate are two names that shouldn't go next to each other in a panel discussion. Tongue twister. So Marcus Bate, Partnerships and Communities Director, Mount Anvil, and Nicola Bacon, Director of Social Life. Thanks very much for joining us this morning. We'll be asking each of you in turn to respond to the question of if social value is being delivered and for whom, and we will be starting off with Michael.
Yeah, so morning everyone, first and foremost. I do think it is beginning to be delivered, and I think there's an opportunity to push it out in different directions, more than just where it potentially mainly sits in regards to procurement. And I saw someone's kind of asked that question in the Q&A. We are in a very lucky position to be an organisation as a council that buys and procures across everything that we do, just by the nature of our existence, but also by the nature of what we do. Social value and social impact is embedded in terms of quite a bit of our work. And one of the kind of main principles of social investment is thinking about how we can balance financial outcomes with non-financial outcomes, and also thinking about how we can embed social value into everything that we do. So there's kind of the obvious places that have been mentioned in terms of developments, in terms of our property and housing, and in terms of our main procurement when we work with partners. But there's also the long-term questioning on what we do with our own buying power when we're thinking about our own buildings in our own organisations. So that might mean where we're buying in regards to our main council building and thinking about, can we buy from social entrepreneurs and social enterprises. It's also in regards to how we work with our partners, and being able to influence them further down their supply chain to ensure that they are employing local people. And then also the kind of more innovative things in terms of some of our resources in regards to our green spaces, our libraries, our housing, how we can augment some of our adult social care as well. So I think there's a position that the public sector can start to play in terms of their partnerships with the private sector to think about what more can be done, what more innovation can be embedded, but also we need to kind of look ourselves in the mirror first and get our own houses in order to think about what we can do. So it's really important from our side as a team in social investment to think about how we can innovate. We don't want to be working with partners and saying, you know, what can you do to gain social value in our borough through a development or through any partnership. It's also about what we can do, what social enterprises can we work with, how can we support our VCSs. And I think, yeah, at the moment we're very much on a journey and we're continuing to do that as a sector. I think there's kind of large existential questions that most people on this panel and in the chat sector in terms of measurement, what it looks like, how long the kind of impact is measured for as well is important. But I think now we're starting to have the general conversation across the sector about what more can be done and what points can we create social value in.
Thanks very much. I think probably that last point that you made, that you're on a journey, there's lots of existential questions, and there's lots of consideration about getting your own house in order, perhaps relates to that question of who's driving social value. Is it the public sector or is it the private sector? So I wonder if you want to respond to that question that we asked earlier.
Yeah, so I this is an interesting one because I have a background in both, and I also have a background outside of real estate in terms of both. So I think in terms of the private sector, if you were to look inside real estate, I think it's that kind of alignment to what people might call corporate social responsibility. You get a social impact report at the end of the year type of thing. There's normally some level of social value calculator, social return on investment, efficiency saved, which comes up with a big number. And I think that's helpful when you're doing an annual report to be able to say what you've invested into community and what else you've done. I think there are other sectors that kind of push it further out than that in terms of it not being a core part of their work. So I think there's other industries, if you maybe look at the finance sector, tech and places like that, where it's not necessarily always aligned to the actual operations. And I think sometimes in real estate, in terms of some of the innovation that we need to start adding, it needs to be geared towards the actual needs of the area. So often, and we know we're guilty of this ourselves, often the kind of natural progression in terms of jobs and employment is something around getting people into construction, because it creates jobs in an area, but ultimately we're probably working with a real estate organization and that's actually beneficial to them and the organization as well. So one of the journeys that we're on is kind of working with private sector partners to ensure that any social value that is created in our borough is actually geared towards the needs of our residents, and that has come through a long amount of engagement where they've told us these are the things that we need actually in our particular geographical areas and wards, and that's where we want to be geared towards. I think the public sector also then has a role in terms of kind of being a bit tougher in regards to what the expectancy is, and this is a conversation that I have with quite a few of my colleagues in the sector, and the team at Islington were mentioned, and they're kind of best in class. I know Joyce and Caroline and the team there, and it's around making sure that as a partner, there's an understanding that you're working with us and as partnership, and we're geared towards the same thing, but also as a public sector organisation, understanding that ultimately you are the buyer and you do have a position to be able to have an expectancy of what's delivered in your borough. And I think sometimes this could be a cultural thing, historical thing. There's often fear about having that conversation when you're working with the private sector partner, to be able to say, actually, this is what we need. Sorry, we're not just going to accept kind of the minimal 10% or the generic kind of jobs and apprenticeships. These are the things that our people in our wards and our constituents need, and we'd actually prefer that as opposed to kind of something that you might normally run as a program. So I think it's a balance of both, but I think both are kind of on the right journeys. But I do think at the moment it's now being driven by the public sector because there's a need in terms of cost savings, in terms of efficiency, in terms of helping our residents and our communities. And we see it as an opportunity to do a lot more of that.
That's great, thank you. And certainly you're picking up there on some of the themes from panel one around community engagement or consultation, and the importance, the critical nature of that in terms of delivering something that really is needed, really is meaningful. Thank you very much for the contribution. Do stay with your video up. We'll kind of turn this into a panel discussion shortly. So if that's the kind of public sector point of view, I'll hand over now to Marcus from Mount Anvil, who can share with us a more private sector perspective on the question of if social value is delivering.
Thanks, Anna. I enjoyed your existential question to Michael. I was having an existential moment, having been renamed as Marcus Blake, actually. Although having spent so much time with Michael, hearing his demands for what social value outcomes we need to deliver in our partnership at Lots Road, I'm not surprised if some people might think we're married. I caught the end of panel 1, and I really enjoyed, I heard from Paul, I think, saying about, for the private sector, social value delivery may be giving a competitive edge. For the public sector, it needs to be business as usual. And I disagree. And I can see a really cool opportunity. I think procurement's the most exciting space for social value delivery, point 1. It's the start of, or near the start of a project, when things can change most. It's also where the commissioner who ultimately is seeking to obtain the outcomes of the project can say what they need, as you're saying, Michael. So where the private sector's role in a project is to facilitate the public sector commissioner's outcomes, which is what we do. We only hang around for 5-10 years, whereas RBKC is there forever. Then procurement is like one of the most powerful ways of focusing objectives from the start. And if the private sector want to keep winning new work and being profitable, your competitive edge needs to be baked in as business as usual. You need to be able to deliver what you promise to deliver. Otherwise, I think what Louise said about, like, it's not genuine, it's not real, people will find you out really quickly. So I think procurement's one of the most exciting areas. Anecdotally, we've bid on only 5 projects ever. We don't do many competitive procurements. The 4 that we've won, we've come top on social value, and the one that we lost, we didn't. We extrapolate that social value delivery really matters to our private sector partners. If I was to take the opposite end of the extreme, I think the planning system is an absolute shocker at failing to recognise or give due weight to social value delivery beyond some anodyne, that local labour was nice, thanks very much, but it rarely changes that much. But I do also wonder whether the planning system can't recognise the non-physical social value outcomes that I think a number of people in panel 1 and Michael would be so close to and passionate about. And then maybe if you've got procurement as the best, having biggest impact, and planning I think is the worst, it's the same as it was 10 years ago when I was planning practitioner. I think in between design, I love the innovation, the creativity that we see from more and more consultants who pitch to us, who try and convince us that we should appoint them because not just their architectural or planning or engagement skills, but because of their experience and ability to bring different outcomes from a social value perspective. So I see a lot of creativity there. And also, thanks, Michael, for the point on cross-sector. But we are hiring more people from outside sector because we see that social value allows for a different skill set to traditional development management. I love my planners and surveyors in my team, but I think there's some great skill sets from other sectors that can facilitate unconventional, creative, outstanding social value outcomes. That's me.
Thanks very much, Marcus. And apologies for renaming you, or maybe you like the rename, I don't know. I think you've made some really brilliant points there. The comment you've made about non-physical outcomes, I think, is something that I would really like to pick up on in the broader Q&A, and also kind of understanding the panel 1 and panel 2's view on measurement. So we've spoken a lot about more traditional ways of measuring, like HACT, and they of course have a really valuable role to play, but I'm just wondering if there's any thoughts about how we might capture those more qualitative or non-physical outcomes as well. So something perhaps we can come back to, but first of all I'll hand over to Nicola Bacon from Social Life to give her response to the question of if social value is delivering. Thanks, Nicola.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me to speak here. So I'm Nicola Bacon, I'm from Social Life. We are a team of researchers and built environment practitioners, and we've been working for 10 years now on different projects sort of exploring the relationship between people and places. We've worked on regeneration schemes, on new build schemes, town centres, Co-design participation in the UK and internationally. We work with local government, we work with private sector, so we bring a lot of thought and experience of trying to think through these issues, which I think are genuinely interesting, and our work, unsurprisingly, has become increasingly focused around social value over the last 5 years particularly. When we started, we talked a lot about social sustainability, but that has kind of morphed into social value. But very rarely about the Social Value Act. In fact, the Social Value Act, in spite of the work we've been doing, has been something very much in the background and not very much at the forefront of our thinking or our clients' thinking about this. So our starting point really is kind of obvious. The way we create new developments and the way we renew existing buildings and places has really significant social and environmental consequences. And new change in the built environment can support greater social equity. It can support local, huge increases in social value for existing communities and new communities, or it can undermine community strengths. And we've seen too many examples sort of in our work and elsewhere of places where new development has inadvertently often broken up social networks. It's led to the loss of social infrastructure, and it's damaged those very subtle social supports that hold communities together that are often particularly important to people whose lives are most difficult. So when we're thinking about social value and what impact it makes, we would say we very much need to think very broadly about what is the impact of places on people's well-being and people's lived experience. So that is kind of where I come from when I'm thinking about, is social value having an impact? And our experience is social value is often too narrowly defined. It fails to capture these wider issues about well-being and lived experience, and really trying to get into that detailed understanding of what is supporting communities. And I think we really need to go further and spend a lot more time understanding these intangible things, understanding what is supporting communities, people's well-being, their belonging, their sense of safety, how people are relating to their neighbours, what the kind of social fabric is. And we really need to understand sort of what supports communities, what the assets are locally, what are the strengths, whether that's the local shop that people go to for social support and small loans, the shopping centre, which is a great place to hang out if you're a teenager, the chip shop, what the role is of local stories and histories, what the role is of those very subtle social networks that often aren't visible to people who work in a place. So, however, we do think there's like great knowledge out there. There's good practice about how we can make social value more place-based, and we've heard lots of it this morning. So what we've learned, and we very much think of this as a work in progress, we are kind of building our experience, we're learning as we go along. So where we are at the moment is we think it's really important we think of social value as a process. So it's something that captures outcomes, but it's not an outcome in itself, and it needs to be place-based, it needs to be specific to each place. And social value needs to be a process that runs through from earliest thinking about the site, about engagement, about research, about communities and about the local context, to planning, design, build, thinking about social infrastructure, governance, management. It needs to run through continuously that whole quite lengthy process. Secondly, it needs new expertise. It's like it needs to bring in new perspectives. It needs to bring in communities and residents as experts in their own right, not just through engagement, but on an ongoing process. And it needs kind of social value practitioners who understand how to deliver about outcomes that involve well-being and lived experience. And also it needs to challenge, and it means to think about how we really deliver social value out of built environment change. We need to think about going beyond the professional silos we currently work within. And it means we all need to think more broadly about what we're doing. And it means architects and planners need to really understand lived experience and community dynamics. Residents and activists need to really understand the pragmatic decisions about change and about what it really means to build new places. So we at Social Life, we have a number of projects at the moment about measuring the impact of regeneration on an ongoing basis in places like Woodbury Down in Hackney, in South Acton Estate. We're working on social infrastructure plans, and we're working very closely with communities in some places to understand their priorities, working in places like Walworth, in Southwark, and Downham and Newham. So yeah, that's kind of my contribution. So I think, you know, to sort of summarize, I think we can get more out of social value than we are at the moment. I think we can get more out of that investment and more out of all this interest and energy that there is about the issue.
Great, thanks, Nicola. Yeah, I would completely agree that there is a huge energy and interest in social value at the moment. That's partly why we're running the programme, and hopefully through the course of the next year we can begin to answer some of Michael's existential questions, but also pick up on some of the things that you've mentioned there, Nicola. I was really taken by your comment that social value is a process, not an outcome, and I think that really reflects what panel one were talking about when Layla spoke about the legacy that needs to be left. Again, I've got lots of questions. The audience have lots of questions as well. So what I'm going to do is invite panel one to rejoin us on screen so we can have a bit of a round table with everyone responding to the questions where they feel they've got something to contribute. And I will go back to the question that I left panel one with, which let me just remind myself where we were with that one. What are your thoughts on social value becoming a procurement-driven process? Is this the right way to embed social value within projects and programs? So this is a question for everyone on screen right now. Anyone who would like to take that one on, just give me a little wave. Go on, Paul.
First of all, I'm feeling a bit guilty that I banged on quite a lot about procurement and the finances around social value at the start, really, because I just 7 minutes, so I thought I'd focus in on one particular aspect of it. Just particularly want to just pick up and thank Nicola and Marcus in particular, because they sort of opened the discussion out a bit. I thought Nicola's sort of talking about, you know, the well-being and lived experience. Really, that is at the heart of what we're talking about here. Procurement's just a tool. So I really like that. And Marcus made the very good point that actually one of the big drivers of innovation and creativity in the whole built environment, particularly my world, regen world, lots of that innovation and creativity comes through the social value activity. I think it's important we don't lose sight of that.
Nicola.
Yeah, I mean, I think procurement is almost, it's like a comfort zone thing. It's like it's easy to think about procurement because it's a structured process. It's something we kind of we can work out what to do with it, and it matters. And you know, you can deliver a lot of really useful things through procurement. But I think it's really important to go that step further. I think procurement it's one tool alongside a whole range of different activities that happen. That can deliver social value. So I would downplay the importance of procurement. I'd say we kind of know how to do that, and let's broaden out and move on to other things.
And we've just got a comment in the chat, Nicola, that relates to your mention of social value being a process and not an outcome. It really resonated with, I think, a lot of people in the audience. The specific question is, with this in mind, how can procurement be a driver for social value when it's so outcome focused? Maybe it can't.
Is that for me?
Yeah, for you or for anyone else?
I mean, I think it can. You know, it is one element of the process. It's like it's something you think about. And I thought Marcus's point about working outside the sort of familiar actors within the sector is really important. And like procurement is a way of bringing in, you know, it's really widening impacts and what happens. But yeah, it has its place. It needs to be seen as part of a bigger picture.
Okay. Moving on from kind of the importance of additional measures, so non-physical measures or the wellbeing measures that have been mentioned. I have got a question here, which is, I suppose, kind of a back to basics one for all of the panel, but a really important one to ask. Claire Richards has said, please can you ask the panelists to define what they mean by social value? She finds it a slippery term. Without definition, it's impossible to understand the impact of communities. For instance, communities might define it very differently from a developer or an investor. And indeed, we've had some conversations with community representatives recently where they have said, in all the meetings that I've been in with local authorities, with private sector developers, I've never heard the term social value. So with that in mind, how do you define it, thinking through that community lens? Anyone want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think for us, so I agree with all that sentiment, and when we did our community engagement, and in particular, kind of, we did an appreciative inquiry process, which is, you know, you ask people what's happening well and what would you like to improve. We really just take it away from the nuts and bolts and kind of the jargon, which is, what can we do to improve your health, well-being, and your living? It's just that simple. And the list has now come out in terms of what that means. I actually do think kind of the jargon and language is really problematic when you're speaking to someone on the street, which is why I agree with Nicola around the procurement piece, because then you've got to start getting into legalities around things like Section 123 and Social Value Acts. And I think at the end of the day, people just want to know, how can you make my life better, and actually have an improvement in well-being. And that's one of the reasons why, to Marcus's point around the non-visible things, which health and well-being is a big one. We are quite focused on that, because we just want to be able to ask people at the end of the day, did this project improve how you felt about the area? Do you feel closer to your neighbour, which is another thing, because place is another thing that we're quite kind of obsessed with. And most people that speak to me, I always say one of the things that I'm waiting for the sector to tell me is kind of the measurement around what place means. So the analogy I always use is, for an Arsenal fan, what does that statue of Thierry Henry mean outside the Emirates? It's not something that's quite clearly an output focused thing. It doesn't create jobs. It doesn't kind of do anything in terms of thinking of it in that way. But if it was potentially to be knocked down, it would cause uproar. And I still think that's the piece that is still mission within social value, and therefore also procurement. So ours was very simple. We kind of we took the jargon away and said, what are the things that we can improve? What are the areas that you'd like to see us focus on? And in fact, it's an interesting one, because in terms of when we've had conversations around social investment and social value and social impact and ESG and different jargon, it's been a lot easier to just talk about case studies and what it does, especially internally and externally, because I think we have to be really open and say the sector's still extremely immature, both in terms of the way it speaks and the way it measures. And Marcus heard me say something similar yesterday. I think we're still in this, is it VHS or Betamax? And actually everyone's waiting for DVD. And in terms of kind of the one-stop shop and taking it to the next level, and we're still in that phase where everyone's looking at different options, different forms of measurement. And I just think it's just best to take it down to the most granular form, which is what is going to make kind of our residents' lives best. And the only way you can get that answer is asking them. And I agree with Nicola, it's a continuous process. So the dream is, if resource and everything is in place, we will continue that level of co-design, that level of engagement. When we speak to residents, we say this is not finished. It will never be finished. When I speak to people, I say this is the first brick. Someone else will lay the second brick. Residents will lay the third. Communities and VCSs will lay the next one. And it's just something that is a continuous process over and over again. So although there's that kind of, this is the language for the sector, brutally, when we speak to people on kind of the street, it's about what makes it best for you. And we always just kind of say, in terms of the way that we view it, or definitely in terms of how I personally view it, if you look at, La Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, Gaudi never saw it finished. So when I talk about the social value and social investment and everything else, this will be something that will be hit 50, 60, way past me even being alive, and it'll be the next person that takes that step and continuously. But at the core of it, I do think as a sector, get away from the language, get away from the jargon. What is making our residents' life better? What's improving your well-being? And sometimes it can be really simple things like more open green spaces. It doesn't always need to be kind of output focused.
Thanks, Michael. I'm going to jump to Layla there, simply because we've just referenced Arsenal Stadium. You've got West Ham Stadium in your park. How do you talk to, I think I'm interested in particular, how do you talk to your young people about social value? Do you use the term, or are there other languages that you use?
No, yeah, it's an interesting terminology. I think it's one that the sector uses, but actually it doesn't mean anything to the community, and it certainly doesn't mean, anything to young people. So it's certainly not a term we use. I suppose, we look at the kind of the community and how the community is benefiting, and we look at kind of lived experience and all the things that have been discussed and around well-being, but also that sense of belonging to place, and the whole piece around placemaking is really important, and how even just small bits of the puzzle that people are involved in, how impactful that is. So there's lots of particularly around our youth and education programs, it's around young people having new experiences, doing things they didn't know they were capable of. These are all, measures that can start to impact on where someone, a young person directs their pathway, and how the park can support in that. So I think it's a catch-all term that I think doesn't quite, because you've got the individual outcomes that around it, but then you've got the community outcomes, the environmental. There's so many different parts to it that I think it's quite. Yeah, I think it's a term that's starting to be used, particularly under that kind of procurement umbrella, that I think we need to move. We need to move.
Thanks, Layla. And I could see that both Polly and Marcus wanted to respond to Michael's original point. So I'll hand over to Marcus first. I feel like it looks like I've offended you twice, first with your name and now by mentioning West Ham. So Marcus and then to Polly.
Stick to Arsenal. Yeah, I was just thinking that, and I heard a few people mention about like jargon and multiple definitions. And Nicola, you mentioned on, we need to look at things more broadly. I guess if you were to take the opposite view, this is just me being devil's advocate, I think the breadth and depth of different ways of looking at social value outcomes is a sign of intelligence and the breadth and depth of inquiry that a load of experts are applying in the sector. So it doesn't have to be a bad thing that there are so many different ways of looking at it, would be my first point. And then my second one, I'm a generalist, I know very little in this area. I love working with the likes of Nicola and Louise, who know deeply about this. For me, the one that really stands out, and maybe this makes sense of why I think the planning system struggles with social value, are the ones that go to the intangible. How do I feel about myself? And how do I feel about my relationship to other people and places? So my very simple definition is soulful value. How do I feel about myself? Am I better as a result of this? And sociable value, do I feel like part of the space? And the neighborliness, which I think culturally, England has a huge opportunity to improve neighborliness. I'm looking forward to some coronation celebrations on our street, which might bring back some neighborliness and social value we haven't seen in a while. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting area, and I love the breadth of ideas that people have.
Thanks, Marcus. Polly.
Yeah, I think it's, I really agree with Michael. It's a really interesting point, but something that maybe I would sort of challenge some of the other panelists on. I think that one of the reasons that social value has been embraced by the public sector is that it does help to give smaller organizations and organizations who do believe in something beyond profit, like a leading edge when winning procurement contracts. However, I think that a lot of the measurement frameworks that we have are quite limited. And of course, there's room for them to grow. But I do think that one of the drawbacks of them is that they boil people down to numbers and figures and spreadsheets and boxes, and they're a box ticking exercise. And there's two things really. So one is that I would, I think we do need to be capturing those case studies and those real human stories to actually be showing, what is it that makes our project special, and how can we be sure that that is delivering social value in a way that people and communities understand. I would love to see people actually challenging these the status quo of social value measurement and actually putting these questions back to communities and saying, well, if you were to measure the social value, how would you phrase it? What would you do? How would you redesign it? And actually having a co-design process on some of these social value frameworks, rather than being technocratic and top down. So I think that there is a real opportunity, but a challenge for the sector in actually saying, well, we're not going to just rely on the TOMs or hack. We're going to actually ask people what they want to measure and try and apply some of these processes. The other thing that I'm quite worried about is that it is quite a big overhead for us as a really small organisation to be filling in the social value framework and to really get our heads around the data capturing. And I think that whilst these tools have been brought into favour, organisations like us who are small and who are, more politically radical, if you like, I worry that with the increased emphasis on this and the capturing of data, we're going to see a shift towards the other side, to having those big private companies who are for profit being able to employ somebody who can spend all of their day just filling in these boxes. And that's going to then in turn, negatively impact the small organizations who had achieved a leading edge. So my slight challenge to you.
That's a great challenge, and it looks like Nicola has a response for you.
Yeah, I think it's important not to mix up existing rigid frameworks that I agree are do turn into box ticking exercises, and different ways of constructing indicator frameworks that are very place-based and community-based. And there's just, because measurement is problematic at the moment, doesn't mean that it couldn't be more creative and more useful. So for example, on Woodbury Down, we sort of designed a social impact framework with all the regeneration partners there, which goes from the residents' organisations through to the developer with the council and housing association in there. And we're just going back to do our second round of research with this. And you can do these things, and they are, they're resource intensive at the beginning, but then that's something you have in place for, the next 10, 15, 20 years. So I think, there are ways of working around measurement that can be really creative and can be completely responsive to communities. And I would never use the word social value at the beginning of designing a social value framework. It would just really not help at all. And I don't think anyone should. But all those issues about like what matters to you, what would make this place better, well, those are the ways in that we use.
Great, thanks, Nicola. And I'm not sure we've got time to address this in huge detail, but I want to acknowledge that Polly and Nicola, you have picked up on a question from Dieter Kleiner at RCKA, who asks, how can smaller organisations demonstrate the value of their contribution? Should they ignore the complexities of measurement of hacks or TOMs and focus on local need as identified through engagement or other metric or measuring organisation requirements? So I don't know if you've got anything that you just quickly want to add in as a response. We may have covered the response to that question there.
I'm not sure it's even on them. I think systemically, as the buyer, you should be doing everything to make it a smoother and as easy a process for them, be that in terms of kind of the platform that you've picked. Does it pass down costs and finances? I know that some of these platforms do, but also ensuring that it's not kind of any rigidity that they might potentially have to do that. That's why I agree on some of the points around procurement. It's different for me because kind of by our, and probably similar to Paul, by our nature, we kind of are part of the area, so we have opportunity to make it a bit more systemic, have a bit more innovation, where there's not a need for them to either have to do those things or we can make it easier. And I'm from a social enterprise and charity background. These are a lot of the same issues that you used to talk about when you're applying for a grant application or you're applying for what social investment is outside of our PKC. And we always used to think about lived experience around that and talking about things like application processes and then therefore measurement. And to all the points, does it always need to be something that you sit down for 2 hours and write a form on in terms of actually applying initially, and then you say this is what we've done on other projects? Or can it be actually come down and speak to us for an hour and see if we're aligned? And as long as we're transparent in terms of those processes and we believe potentially in the project and the impact it's going to have, I think that can be important. And two, and this is something that I speak to the team about a lot, I think sometimes in the public sector it's either kind of seen as success and failures in terms of a lot of our projects, and that is why sometimes people are so metric kind of focused. Now, for our first sort of 2 years, we've run pilot projects in regards to a lot of our programs which have been successful, but the main aim that we ran them were based on learnings. So there wasn't, we need to have 100 or 200 people through this. Some of the most successful things for us were actually the location, where this is quite interesting. Could we think about how we could do this? That social enterprise was quite interesting to work with, but they struggled within this area because it's a cost for them to come down. What wraparound support can we provide in the long-term future? What partner can we put them in contact with? And I like I said, we're in this position to be able to do that systemically. But I do think, and I put this as a challenge to kind of other housing association, local councils, that when we work with our procurement colleagues, it is also about thinking, how can we be more inclusive of them? Because if we're setting the challenge to contract managers, procurers, that we want more local employment and local contractors, this is a core challenge for them, and they won't be able to compete. And I agree with Polly's point. I've seen those companies that hire the bid manager for one contract and they've got all the time in the world. And I've worked with the charities where the CEO writes the bid, does the day job, works with her team, has to do the HR and everything. They just don't have the time to do this. So, it's a challenge to us as an organization and organizations like us to make it kind of simpler for them. I think it's an unfair question to say kind of what can they do. First and foremost, it's what can we do to make it easier, and then potentially we start looking at kind of what the best system of measurement is. But yeah, I will always kind of bang the drum for the social enterprise, the CIC, and the kind of on the ground communities. We need to make it easier for them to be included in the process because they know what's best. They're on the ground every day. They're doing the grassroots impact, and we've just got to facilitate to make their impact greater.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Michael. And it brings us back to some of the themes we started off with in panel 1 around being more bottom up with the delivery and creation of social value, but also Louise's point that she so eloquently made about this being a journey and the necessity for everyone to learn how to do this better. We're coming up towards the end of the session, so I wanted to share with everyone the poll results that we put towards our audience at the very beginning of the session. I think some of them are quite telling. So if there's any responses from the panel to these, then I'll be really interested to hear them. So we've got 38% of our audience don't have a clear understanding of what social value really means within the built environment sector. 57% aren't sure if the sector's approach is having a meaningful impact on local places and communities, and 78% think that it's time for a shift in approach to how we deliver social value. So I think those statistics are certainly something that will be helping us to think about how we develop our programme in response to them. But panellists, are there any other any comments on that? Any of that surprising to you?
Number three, this is probably for Nicola actually, and I'm keen to get your opinion on it. Number three is an interesting one for me in terms of the way we speak about hyperlocality. And the reason being is by the nature of kind of how I work and where I work, community is considered where your ward is and within our borough boundaries and borough lines. Now, I think that's a difficult and potentially small way of thinking about it, because you can have grown up in an area, potentially moved away from it and been in the second kind of, be in Brent, Hammersmith and Fulham, and still shop every single day in our borough. Your aunties, uncles, cousins, everything else still lives in our borough. And sometimes it's a difficulty for us when the measurement is geared towards that. And I think the word community is something that I've always seen as more than potentially when people talk about hyperlocal, and when people talk about placemaking, I see it kind of as a whole area. So I think about West London, or London as a whole. And yes, I'm keen to when Nicola does her work to that hyperlocal point where people seem to want more hyperlocality. That's a real challenge for us, because a lot of the time that means, for example, if I run a program in a particular area, the expectancy from measurement is they need to be in this particular ward, or they have to be from our borough. And I personally think that's quite problematic, and two, it means that you can't have as much impact, because you can still have people who are part of your community but don't necessarily live in your postcode. So that's kind of just more of a point on that comment, and I'm just intrigued to see, Nicola, anyone else on the call what their feelings is on that.
Yeah,
I will jump in and say we've only got a few moments,
apologies.
So your question might have to receive a short response. Nicola, go ahead.
I just think the answer is about communities. So different, the people who go to Shepherd's Bush Market to shop may not be from that immediate area, but they are absolutely vital when you're thinking about how to change Shepherd's Bush Market. So just, it's a sort of look at the place and look at who's using it. I would say that's my very quick answer.
Thank you. And it looks like Louise is nodding as her very quick answer to that as well. Brilliant. Well, look, I feel like we could continue this conversation for several hours, but I won't, because I'm sure everyone's got places to go and things to do. So what I will ask is our panel to turn off their videos now as we close. A really huge thank you from myself and the Future of London team for kicking off our social value project with such provocative thoughts and interesting debates. As mentioned, this conversation really is just the start of our programme, Unlocking Social Value. Our next big event, and what a date for all of your diaries, is the 4th of July. We'll be holding our annual conference at the RSA in central London, the Royal Society of Arts. We would love for you all to join us. So there's a link being popped in the chat right now. This allows you to pre-register for that event. So please do register there and get it in your diaries. The whole theme for the day will be social value, and we'll be picking up on some of the unresolved conversations that we had this morning, as well as many other themes that are bubbling under the surface. You can also sign up for our mailing list, links in the chat as well, and there are also links to our project page for this particular project being popped into the side chat as well. And you'll also find a link to a feedback form, which we would be really grateful if you could fill in. That just helps us understand how you've enjoyed the event, and if there's anything that we can do to improve either our online events or our physical events in the future. So once again, huge thank you to everyone who joined us today on the panel. Really appreciate it. And also a huge thank you to our sponsors for this project. They are Bouygues, Linux City, Countryside Partnerships, Montague Evans, Mount Anvil, Pollard Thomas Edwards, Charles and Hamlins and New Capital. So that's it. Before you leave, just do remember to fill in that feedback form and sign up for the conference, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Bye.